Archangel Michael says, "Do not move past this moment as though it were ordinary. Something has shifted behind what you can see, and the reason this message found you now is not to frighten you, but to awaken the part of you that has been ignoring a quiet signal for far too long." Pause here. There is someone around your story who has been wearing a face that does not match what they carry inside. God is not revealing this so that you become suspicious of everyone. Heaven is drawing your attention to one specific pattern, one strange inconsistency, one feeling you kept explaining away because your heart wanted to believe the best. And what is about to unfold may completely change the way you understand what has been happening around you. Listen carefully, beloved soul, because the first sign was not something dramatic. It was small. Almost invisible. A sentence spoken at the wrong time. A sudden change in someone's energy when your name was mentioned. A promise that sounded beautiful but somehow left you feeling emptier instead of reassured. You noticed it, but you dismissed it. You told yourself you were overthinking. You wondered whether you were being unfair. Yet something deep within you remained unsettled, because truth has a way of touching the spirit before the mind can explain what it has discovered. And tonight, in this fictional message of divine symbolism, that quiet discomfort becomes the doorway to something much larger. There is a reason you have felt as though two different realities have been moving around you. In one reality, someone appears supportive, warm, interested, even protective. In the other, their behavior changes when certain people enter the room, when certain opportunities appear, or when they believe you are no longer watching. That contradiction has exhausted you more than you realize. You have been trying to reconcile words with actions, kindness with distance, promises with strange disappearances. But what if you were never meant to force those pieces together? What if the confusion itself was the clue? Archangel Michael stands within this story as the symbol of courage, discernment, and the strength to see clearly without becoming bitter. And the message is not, trust no one. The message is far more precise: stop betraying your own discernment merely to preserve someone else's image. That is where the emergency lies. Not in danger. Not in panic. The emergency is that you are approaching a turning point, and if you carry an illusion into the next chapter, you may make decisions based on a person who has never fully shown you who they are. Something happened recently that changed the spiritual atmosphere of this story. Someone believed they could continue playing two roles without those roles ever colliding. They believed they could speak one way to you and another way elsewhere. They believed they could praise you publicly while quietly benefiting from your uncertainty. They underestimated something, however. They underestimated how quickly hidden motives begin exposing themselves when circumstances change. And a circumstance has changed. You may already have noticed it. A message that arrived differently than usual. A conversation that ended too quickly. Someone suddenly asking questions they never cared about before. A person who once seemed calm becoming strangely curious about your plans. None of these things alone prove anything. But together, in this cinematic story, they form a pattern. And patterns speak when individual moments remain silent. Stay with this, because the person being called fake is not necessarily the person your emotions would immediately accuse. That is the first twist. The obvious person may only be a distraction. Someone else has been standing closer to the center of the situation, hidden behind familiarity. Their power came from the fact that you never considered looking in their direction. They knew how to make you feel safe. They knew which words would soften you. They knew when to appear concerned. Most importantly, they understood something about your heart. When you care about someone, you do not immediately assume the worst. You look for explanations. You offer chances. You consider context. You give people room to correct themselves. Those are beautiful qualities, but beautiful qualities require boundaries, because there are people who interpret patience as permission. And there is another detail heaven wants illuminated within this fictional revelation. The fake behavior was not born yesterday. It began quietly, at a time when you were already carrying enough emotional weight that you had little energy left to question inconsistencies. You were focused on surviving your own uncertainty. You were trying to rebuild confidence, understand a relationship, make sense of delays, or simply keep moving forward. That was when someone learned they could enter the gaps created by your exhaustion. At first, they did not take anything obvious from you. They took information. Small pieces. What you hoped for. Who mattered to you. What you feared losing. What kind of reassurance made you relax? What future you imagined when no one else was listening? They gathered these things not through interrogation, but through closeness. Through conversations that felt harmless. Through moments where you believed you were simply being understood. But information changes power. And eventually, they knew enough to influence the atmosphere around you without appearing responsible for what changed. Perhaps they repeated something you said but altered its meaning. Perhaps they planted a doubt in someone else's mind while pretending they were only concerned. Perhaps they presented themselves as the bridge between two people while quietly enjoying the distance that bridge never actually repaired. The details may differ in the world of this story, but the emotional truth remains the same. Someone discovered that confusion gave them importance. That is why clarity threatens them. Do you understand now why certain moments became strangely complicated whenever you were close to receiving a direct answer? Why straightforward conversations somehow turned into misunderstandings? Why someone always seemed to have a new piece of information just when you were beginning to feel peaceful? Why your attention kept getting redirected toward another problem? The fake person did not necessarily need you to fail. They needed you to remain uncertain. There is a difference. A person who wants your downfall behaves differently from someone who needs your confusion. Confusion keeps you asking questions. Confusion keeps you returning to the person who claims to have answers. Confusion gives a manipulator relevance. And perhaps the greatest revelation so far is that this person's greatest fear was never your anger. It was your clarity. Because the moment you see the pattern, their position changes. The moment you stop asking them what someone else meant and begin speaking directly, their position changes. The moment you stop explaining your intuition away and start observing behavior without excuses, their position changes. The moment you become comfortable saying, "I do not know yet, and I do not need you to interpret it for me," their position changes completely. This is why the energy around you has felt different. Something inside you has already begun withdrawing from the old pattern, even if you could not name it. You have become quieter. more observant, less willing to react immediately. Maybe you thought you were simply tired. But sometimes emotional exhaustion creates an unexpected gift. You no longer have energy for unnecessary games. And someone noticed. They noticed you stopped explaining yourself as much. They noticed you did not react to the last provocation the way they expected. They noticed that when they introduced doubt, you did not immediately chase reassurance. That unsettled them. Because a person can control a reaction more easily than they can control silence. Something even more important happened after that. The fake person made a mistake. Not a catastrophic mistake. A revealing one. They said something they should not have known, reacted to something they were not supposed to care about, or exposed knowledge that could only have come from a conversation they were never meant to hear. In the moment, it may have seemed insignificant. You might have forgotten the exact words. But your spirit remembered the feeling. That sudden internal pause. That tiny question, how did they know that? Do not rush past that question. It becomes important later. Because another person noticed the same inconsistency. This is where the story begins changing direction. Until now, you may have believed you were the only one sensing that something did not add up. You were not. Someone else has quietly been connecting pieces. They did not speak immediately because they wanted to be certain. They watched. They listened. They compared what they were told with what actually happened. And what they discovered surprised them. The fake person had not been giving everyone the same version of the story. To one person, they portrayed themselves as concerned for you. To another, they suggested you were emotionally unpredictable. To someone else, they acted as though you had confided secrets that you never actually shared. And to the person whose opinion matters most in this situation, they may have presented themselves as the one trying to keep the peace. But peace does not require distortion. Peace does not grow through selective truth. Peace does not need one person controlling what everyone else knows. The moment someone realized this, they stopped asking the fake person questions. Instead, they began checking things independently. And that is where the mask started cracking. A date did not match. A statement contradicted an earlier conversation. A supposed message was remembered differently by the person who actually sent it. A motive that had been attributed to you suddenly made no sense when your real behavior was considered. One inconsistency could have been dismissed. Two might have been coincidence. But the third changed everything. And there was a third. You are not ready for what it revealed. The third inconsistency showed that someone had deliberately positioned themselves between you and a truth that was trying to reach you. Maybe not through some grand conspiracy, but through repeated small interventions. A delayed message. A softened confession. A warning delivered without context. A conversation summarized in a way that removed the most important sentence. Small changes create large emotional consequences. Imagine two people standing on opposite sides of a closed door, each believing the other chose silence, while someone in the hallway knows both of them tried to speak. That is the image at the center of this message. And suddenly, several things you blamed on rejection may deserve to be reconsidered. Several moments you interpreted as indifference may have contained information you never received. Several emotional distances may not have begun where you thought they did. But be careful here. This story is not asking you to invent excuses for anyone. Accountability still matters. People are responsible for communicating honestly. The deeper message is simply that the narrative you were handed may not be complete. And something is coming that will complete part of it. Not everything at once. Just enough. Enough to make one past moment look completely different. Enough to explain why someone behaved strangely after speaking with the fake person. Enough to reveal why a connection that seemed ready to move forward suddenly froze. Enough to show you why a certain name kept appearing around your story even when you tried to move away from it. And when that piece arrives, your first emotion may not be anger. It may be relief. Because there is a particular kind of exhaustion that comes from believing you imagined everything. When truth finally confirms that your confusion had a source, the nervous system does something strange. It becomes quiet. You may think, so that is why. 3 simple words. But they can release months of emotional pressure. So that is why they changed. So that is why the conversation felt incomplete. So that is why I sensed something was missing. So that is why every time clarity approached, another complication appeared. But Archangel Michael's symbolic message carries another warning here. Do not become addicted to uncovering every hidden detail. You do not need to solve every mystery to protect your peace. Sometimes discovering the pattern is enough. Sometimes the healthiest response to deception is not investigation but distance. You are being prepared to choose differently. That is why this message feels urgent. The fake person may attempt one more performance when they sense the truth approaching. They may suddenly become warmer. More helpful. More emotional. They may present information dramatically, hoping to regain control of the narrative before you hear something directly from its source. Pay attention to timing. Not because every kind gesture is suspicious, but because timing reveals motive. Why now? Why this urgency? Why this sudden concern? Why does someone need you to decide how you feel before you have all the information? A sincere person can tolerate your discernment. A sincere person does not panic when you say, I need time to think. A sincere person does not need you isolated from other perspectives. Remember that. Because one of the greatest signs of manipulation is not simply dishonesty. It is urgency designed to prevent reflection. And the strange thing is, the fake person may genuinely care about you in their own distorted way. Human beings are complicated. Someone can feel attachment and still behave selfishly. Someone can believe they are protecting you while actually protecting their own position. Someone can love being needed more than they love seeing you free. That distinction matters. The mask does not always hide hatred. Sometimes it hides dependency. Sometimes jealousy. Sometimes fear of being replaced. Sometimes the need to remain important. This is why your response must be rooted in wisdom rather than vengeance. You do not need to humiliate anyone. You do not need to expose every flaw publicly. You do not need to turn your heart into stone. Your power lies in becoming unavailable for confusion. Imagine the difference between the version of you who once needed immediate explanations and the version being formed now. The older version would hear a troubling statement and spend hours replaying it. The emerging version asks, what do the facts show? The older version would fear that boundaries might cost a relationship. The emerging version understands that relationships requiring the abandonment of boundaries were never truly safe. That transformation is already happening. Someone around you can feel it. And strangely, the person you may have thought was moving away from you has felt it too. There is a quiet shift taking place in them. They are beginning to question something they were told. Not because someone convinced them to doubt it, but because reality stopped matching the story. Your actions did not fit the accusation. Your silence did not fit the image they had been given. Your consistency did not match the warning. Eventually, truth creates friction against false narratives. A lie requires constant maintenance because life keeps producing evidence that contradicts it. And the maintenance is becoming exhausting for the person who created it. That is why they slipped. That is why the third inconsistency appeared. That is why someone else started looking deeper. And that is why a conversation is approaching that the fake person hoped would never happen. A direct conversation. No messenger. No interpreter. No person standing in the middle. Just truth meeting truth. When that happens, one question may be asked. A question so simple that it will dismantle months of confusion. Did you actually say that? Think about the power inside those words. Not accusation. Not drama. Verification. And when the answer comes, the room inside this story changes. Because the answer is no. No, those exact words were never said. No, that was not the intention. No, that was not how the conversation happened. No, that was not what they were asked to tell you. And suddenly, the fake person is no longer protected by ambiguity. But there is more. The altered message was not even the biggest secret. Behind it was a reason. A reason they felt threatened by your connection. A reason your presence changed something they had grown comfortable controlling. A reason they began interfering more heavily when they realized the bond was becoming harder to influence. They had something to lose. Not necessarily money. Not necessarily romance. Something more psychological. Position. Access. Importance. They were afraid that if two people finally understood each other clearly, their role would disappear. And for someone who built their identity around being needed, becoming unnecessary felt unbearable. That is the emotional center of the deception. They were not only hiding the truth. They were protecting a place in someone's life. And now that place is shifting. You can already see the first signs. People are asking fewer questions through them. Someone has stopped sharing private information with them. Another person has become more guarded. A conversation recently ended with an uncomfortable silence because something the fake person said no longer made sense. The walls are not collapsing dramatically. The doors are simply closing. One by one. And perhaps this is the most powerful revelation: sometimes heaven does not remove false people through explosive confrontation. Sometimes truth simply makes their old role impossible to maintain. That is what is happening here. Their influence is weakening because your dependence on their interpretation is weakening. Their control is weakening because direct communication is increasing. Their disguise is weakening because consistency is exposing contradiction. And now there is one final piece you need to hear before this part closes. The fake person knows something you do not yet know. Something about what another person has decided. That is why their behavior has become unusually restless. They are not only afraid of being discovered. They are afraid of what happens after discovery. Because someone who once believed them has already made a private decision. A decision concerning you. A decision that could reverse something you believed was permanently lost. A decision they have not announced yet because they are waiting for one final confirmation. And that confirmation may come from an unexpected source. Not from you. Not from the fake person. From someone who witnessed a conversation months ago and remembered a detail everyone else overlooked. A witness who was never supposed to become important. A person who heard one sentence. Just one. At the time, it meant nothing. Now it changes the entire story. The sentence proves that the fake person knew the truth long before they claimed to know it. And if that sentence is repeated to the right person, one question becomes unavoidable. Why did they lie? That is the question hanging over everything now. But the answer is even more surprising than the lie itself. Because their real reason was never simply jealousy. Never simply control. Never simply fear. There is another connection hiding underneath all of this, and the moment it is revealed, you will understand why this person was so determined to keep two people from speaking directly. The strange message. The sudden distance. The altered conversation. The missing detail. The third inconsistency. They all lead back to one moment. One private moment that happened when you were not there. And in that moment, the fake person heard something about you that changed the way they saw your future. They realized you were closer to a breakthrough than you knew. They realized another person had feelings they had never admitted openly. And then they were told something else, something so unexpected that they made a decision right there to interfere. But what they heard was not what frightened them most. It was the name mentioned immediately afterward. A name you would never expect to be connected to this story. And when that name is finally revealed, everything you thought this situation was about may change completely.